Business 101 students, hi, Catherine Robertson here. All right, so I'm circling back out. I think I have all 18 of you on my email list, and you will be viewing this video. We are in week one. Typically, week one is due on Sunday. I will give you till Monday night since we've been adding new students throughout the week, and I'm trying to get students caught up. First and foremost, make sure that you went through the syllabus and you understand the things happening in the syllabus. Second, make sure that you are looking at the different things on the. All right, you are looking at chapters 1 and 2 in week 1, so make sure that you read in the text. You go through and you read. Let's start first with chapter 1, the role of business in the economy. And really what we're thinking about in chapter 1, talking a lot about the different things that are happening in globally and things that are happening. Be thinking about some of the things that you encounter on a regular basis that are new to the business world, right? That are new to the consumer world. And so thinking about, what businesses are doing to generate long-term profit and what businesses are doing to create value for their customers. All right, so thinking about profit and loss, thinking about entrepreneurs, it's kind of an chapter 1 talks a little bit about the standard of living, this idea of the quality and quantity of goods and services available to a population, right? And an overall quality of life, this sense of well-being. When you go into a grocery store, or you go into a place like Walmart, what do you see? You see choices, right? And choices represent a higher standard of living. You have 40 choices of yogurt, right? Maybe not 40, maybe like 30, right? But all of those choices, right? When we have choices, we feel this sense of well-being. We feel cared for, right? By the stores. When we have lots of choices, that's one way. Some countries don't have that, right? So in this first chapter, we also talk about the business eras, the Industrial Revolution, the entrepreneurship era, production era. Really, production era started with when we went from the Industrial Revolution. We went then into the idea of the automobile and this idea of mass producing things for greater efficiency, right? And so we thought about, when we think about this production era, really we think about the assembly line in Henry Ford. And then, and how do we have this thing that we made, which was the automobile, how do we get it into everyone's hands for mass consumption, right? So chapter 1 touches on the production era and then the marketing era, which began after World War II. And really when everybody started having a TV in their house, right? And print ads started to be a thing in magazines in the 50s and 60s, right? So that was the marketing era. And then into what we call the relationship era. So if you're following along in the slides or in the chapter, I'm kind of doing a recap of both, right? You can kind of go through the slides and see a recap of the chapter and also throughout this video. Talking about how nonprofits fill a gap, right, that for-profits do not necessarily find ways to make profit, right? So then we have this idea that either government supported, grant supported, or locally funded through fundraising or through donations. Factors of production, that's also part of chapter 1, right? And talking a little bit about the business environment and how, this idea of speed to market when we're talking about the business environment. Think about how, like, for example, in the electronic industry, right? Particularly in cell phones, even actually in computers and televisions. When a company, whether it's Apple or it's LG, Samsung, is the first to bring an item to market, a new component to either a phone or a computer or TV, it gives them a great advantage, right? And so this idea of speed to market, how soon from the time of conception of an idea can a company then get the prototype into, bring it to market and then get it out for the masses, right? And for mass commercialization. So it's really a key component of when we think about businesses being successful. That is one of the components that we think of. All right. What else from chapter 1? So when you go through the slides, just make sure that you are kind of looking at the different things that, make up the business environment, think of the things that you do as an individual, right? What are your demographics? What are your attitudes? What are your customs? What are your beliefs? What are your values, right? All of those things are your part of what makes you a buyer. And businesses are always trying to capture then who's their target market, right? Who's their key buyer? And so really chapter 1 kind of goes into depth into, just thinking about the business environment overall. All right, chapter 2, I'm just giving you a quick synopsis of the 2 different chapters from this week 1. And chapter 2 starts to talk about the difference between micro and macroeconomics, and really this idea of understanding economics, right? So remember, when you're in the Business 101 class, you're getting a little bit of each type of course that you are then eventually going to take in your business degree. So we're talking a little bit about macro and micro. I know there's a homework question that asks the difference between macro and micro. And micro is really the study of the smaller units, or the study of a firm, a company, and the firm's cost structure, the firm's factors of production. Macro studies overall things, how all of the firms then are operating together, right? What's happening in our economy at large from coast to coast. And so that's the 2 differences. The macro is the large picture, the micro is how an individual firm operates. And so in this chapter, we talk a little bit about the market crashing shortly after 9/11 in 2001. And then we also had a similar situation in 2008, 2009. A little bit about capitalism and how, this idea that private ownership is really one of the keys to an economy and a free market economy. Because if you think about, typically when I do this class, when I have this class in a room, right, I walk around and I start taking people's items. I take their book bags, I take maybe their phone if it's laying on their desk, right? And I take them up to the front and I hold them. Those are the items that you own, that you purchased or somebody purchased for you, right? They're your items, your book bag, your phone. Sometimes I grab a shoe right off somebody. The idea that either somebody worked for those items, or you worked and then you earned money and then you purchased those items, right? And those are your items. If I could just come and take those items from you and you had no right to them, what happens then is, how would you feel, right? If there was no protection of your rights, you'd say, well, I'd call the police if you took a bunch of my items, right? Well, what if there wasn't this protection of private property? And what if I could just come and take what I wanted from you? How would you feel then so what happens is then, very quickly, what we see is people then are like, well, why am I working so hard to make money in order to buy things if somebody else can just take my things? And so what happens then is a breakdown of the overall economy, because the labor force and the individuals, everyone working in production and working in the economy, everyone from, sanitation engineers to doctors, right? Medical doctors, the full gamut. Those folks are all wondering, why am I working so hard and studying so hard if all of my earned money really amounts to nothing, because anyone could just come take my items, right? And so this idea of private ownership is really a key component. Not to go too far down a rabbit hole. Okay, this chapter we talk a little bit about the different types of competition. Most things that we see in a free market economy are perfectly competitive, meaning their items are very similar and they compete with each other. A monopolistically competitive marketplace, these items are highly differentiated or more differentiated, and so then you can charge more for them. This would be the difference between like regular cars, and then monopolistically competitive would be more like fancier cars, right? They're more expensive. Something like maybe Infinities, right, versus the Nissan. The Nissan competes with a bunch of other cars at a certain price point, whereas the Infiniti now is more expensive, very similar car, it's a different version of Nissan, but it's higher priced, right? And it competes with a higher priced grouping of cars, and those cars each have a differentiation quality, right? They're more differentiated. I mean, they have things about them that are different than their competitors. Versus when we think of just the regular car market, we think about things like, okay, what are their warranties, right? They all have 4 tires, they all have airbags, they all have some sort of radio. And then oligopoly is when we only have a couple competitors. So there's only a couple competitors in the marketplace, so it's very specific how they compete against each other versus compete for buyers. And then in a monopoly, most of you know, is when there is a single seller. So chapter 2 goes into a little bit with supply and demand and this idea that we buy more products. The law of demand tells us that we buy more products when the price is cheaper, right? And demand really is the quantity of products the consumers are willing to buy at each different price point. So we buy a different amount. We'll buy more if the price is less, right? And the idea of equilibrium price is when the quantity supplied and the quantity demanded are at the same, whatever that price is, right? So we have that idea of equilibrium. So really go through chapter 1 and 2, and then when you're done, go through the PowerPoints, maybe recap a short video that I have here for you. And the other thing is, kind of think about your daily life relative to items that you purchase, relative to the businesses that you encounter, maybe businesses that you work at, right? And think about some of the things that they struggle with or some of the things that actually work really well for them. All right, the other thing, when you're turning in homework, make sure that you're just emailing it to me as an attachment. That's how I'm doing it for now. Just email it directly to me, and then you will see, usually I'll respond and say, thank